Harlow Kennedy didn't flinch when the new CEO, Harrison Lowe, ambushed her in the middle of a stand-up. "We're restructuring to align with our growth trajectory," he announced, eyes glued to his tablet. "Your position has been made redundant." She nodded once, calm as stone. "I understand. I'll clear out by end of day." No argument, no drama. Just a quiet glance at the framed blueprint on the wall, her faded signature still visible in the corner. The original design. Her legacy. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Then she walked out, past the kombucha bar and buzzword-covered whiteboards, boots clicking on polished concrete. No one said much. "Probably ready to retire anyway," someone muttered. But Harlow wasn't defeated. She looked like someone who had just turned the final page of a long game and was ready to make her move. Because here's what no one remembered. Harlow wasn't just a holdover from the early days. He was the architect. She rebuilt the back end during Black Friday 2016. She kept production alive during the chip shortage. She worked 80-hour weeks to protect employees in acquisition talks. And because she wore cardigans, brought the same turkey sandwich every day and never sought the spotlight, they treated her like furniture. Reliable, invisible, easily discarded. But Harlow had been playing a different game for 15 years. Every bonus converted to equity. Every raise declined for stock options. Class B shares, buried in old incorporation documents, hidden behind trusts and legacy clauses no one bothered to read. They fired her thinking they'd cut dead weight. They just severed their own spine. She didn't drive away. Sat in her gray Honda staring through the windshield, then pulled out a leather portfolio. Cascade Systems Shareholder Trust, Class B voting authority. Inside, highlighted documents, sticky tabs marking power no one knew she still held. She called one person. Leonard Voss, co-founder, a man who lived in a barn office and treated corporate bylaws like sacred texts. 7 words. "Activate my conversion rights. I'm taking control." Leonard didn't hesitate. Understood. They never updated the charter. It's all still valid. 79.4%. Not on any org chart, not in any investor deck, but real, documented, undeniable. She adjusted her rearview mirror, tapped the portfolio once. They thought they'd walked her out. They had no idea she'd just walked in. The next morning she stepped into Leonard's office, the brass bell chiming softly. No small talk. Just coffee, old blueprints, and the founding documents spread across his oak desk. "Here," Leonard said, tapping a clause. "Board expansion after 2017. Never ratified through Class B approval. Executive packages tied to founder consent." Harlow nodded. "Which they never requested." "Assumed your shares were ceremonial," Leonard replied. "Assumed you were part of the scenery." They circled sections, marked discrepancies, highlighted appointments. Harrison had stacked the board with yes-men, compliance-then executives who treated quarterly earnings calls like TED Talks and nodded enthusiastically whenever someone said synergistic ecosystem or vertical integration. Not one of them had been properly vetted through the legacy approval process. Why would they bother? Nobody thought Class B shares still had teeth. Nobody thought Harlow still had power. So Harlow opened her laptop and composed a single email. Not angry, not threatening, just one perfectly crafted sentence. "Per my authority as majority shareholder, I am requesting an immediate governance review." She CC'd the executive assistant, the general counsel, every board member. No exclamation points, no legal jargon, just quiet certainty. Then she opened the company calendar, which still granted her access because IT hadn't processed her termination yet, and created a new event. Subject line: reconvening. No description, no agenda attachments, just that single word and a time slot. Friday 10 a.m. Executive Boardroom. That was it. The first ripple started small. Confused reply all messages from assistants asking for clarification. Then came the message from the general counsel, Diane Fletcher. "Please provide documentation supporting this request." Harlow didn't respond with words. She just attached the bylaws, their own founding documents, signed in ink back when the company operated out of a rented office that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. Meanwhile, Leonard began quietly filing shareholder affirmations with the State Corporate Commission. Proxy authority revoked. Direct voting control assumed. Majority stakeholder privileges activated. It wasn't flashy, no press releases or LinkedIn announcements. But piece by methodical piece, Harlow's hand moved across the chessboard while the other side was too busy curating their personal brands to notice they were being cornered. The new corporate landscape wasn't built with explosions. It was built with footnotes, clauses, subsections. Footnotes that Harlow had written, Leonard had preserved, and Harrison had never bothered to read. She didn't want her job back. That was never the objective. She was setting the stage, and they were all about to discover what they'd actually been sitting on. Harrison Lowe was mid-sip on his oat milk latte when the email notification appeared. Subject: reconvening. He snorted, forwarded it to legal with a quick message. Old guard trying to stay relevant, handle it. Then tossed his phone onto the standing desk he'd special ordered from Scandinavia and went back to reviewing which leadership quote to use in his upcoming company-wide video message. Legal didn't snort. Diane Fletcher, sharp as a surgical blade and patient as stone, opened the attachment, adjusted her glasses and read Section 23C of the Founding Charter twice. Then a third time out loud. Clause 8D, Class B Governance Authority, she said, voice suddenly thin as paper. Per majority shareholder via direct conversion or maintained proxy, any Class B stakeholder holding over 65% may initiate emergency governance review, mandate board audit and reassign executive authority pending formal ratification. Harrison leaned back in his ergonomic chair, waving dismissively. That's ancient boilerplate from the startup days. We've got Series C bylaws now. Modern governance structures. Diane didn't blink. Series C didn't nullify Class B. They layered on top. And unless someone formally amended the founding charter, and I mean formally with shareholder vote and state filing, Clause 8D remains active and enforceable. Harrison blinked. Wait, are you saying? I'm saying, Diane interrupted, that she might actually have the legal authority to call this meeting. And if her holdings are what she claims, we have to honor it. Silence dropped like a brick. Across town, Harlow stood in the parking lot of Cascade's original warehouse facility, the one they still used for bulk storage and hardware testing. The place smelled like cardboard, machine oil, and honest work. None of that lavender sage nonsense they pumped through the HQ ventilation system. This was a place where things got built, where metal met purpose. And to the people who worked here, Harlow wasn't former anything. She was foundational. Miss Kennedy, called out a voice from the loading bay. His name tag read Curtis, and his face hadn't changed much since Harlow used to run weekend inventory checks herself. Didn't expect to see you out here. Didn't expect to be out here, Harlow replied, shaking his hand firmly. But here we are. She walked through the facility, nodding to familiar faces, noting who was still around. She passed Evelyn in quality control, who paused mid-inspection to give her a knowing smile. Still got that same jacket, I see. Still fits, Harlow said, touching the Cascade patch on her shoulder. Wore it when we built this place. She made her way to the old manager's office, now converted into a break room with mismatched furniture and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. She found Gordon there, senior operations lead, a man who'd never missed a deadline and never asked for credit. Harlow poured them both coffee from a pot that probably violated health codes but made coffee that actually tasted like coffee. If I needed your support on something, Harlow asked quietly, something important, would I have it? Gordon didn't even pause. You never took credit when things went right, just responsibility when things went wrong. You always said the warehouse doesn't care about titles, just who shows up when it matters. Harlow nodded once. I might need you to show up. Just one more time. Outside, two warehouse workers leaned against a forklift and watched her walk back to her car. She really gone? One asked. The other shook his head. That don't look like a woman who's gone. That looks like a woman taking inventory. They still called her Miss Kennedy. No directive from HR, no corporate email campaign. That's just who she'd always been to them, and titles don't change that. Back at headquarters, Harrison tried to settle his nerves by scheduling an impromptu team-building escape room experience and floating the idea of custom Slack emojis based on leadership headshots. But the unease was spreading like mold behind drywall. Legal had gone quiet, ops managers were strangely unresponsive, and someone from finance had just requested historical equity documentation going back to the company's founding. Something was moving beneath the surface, invisible but inevitable, like tectonic plates shifting before an earthquake. The PDF loaded with agonizing slowness, each percentage bar crawling forward while Harrison stood over Diane's desk, radiating expensive cologne and barely contained panic. He'd thought this was just a formality, a quick checkbox to dismiss the old guard's desperate play. Then the cursor stopped. Diane didn't speak. She just rotated the monitor toward him and tapped a line halfway down the shareholder registry. He squinted at first, confused, then his eyes focused on the text. Entity, Redwood Holdings Group LLC stake, 79.4% beneficial owner, Cascade Founder Trust, formerly under indirect proxy, converted to direct majority control status, active. The silence hit him first, then the heat, like all the blood in his body, decided to sprint toward his head at once. 79. He croaked, the word catching somewhere between disbelief and a full-body panic attack. What the hell is this? This can't be accurate. This can't be real. Diane's expression remained neutral. It's been verified through 3 independent audits. The trust was structured using legacy Class B shares. She's been steadily acquiring equity for over 15 years, always under the threshold that would trigger disclosure requirements. Extremely sophisticated structuring. But why wasn't this flagged before? Harrison snapped, his voice climbing. Why didn't anyone tell me this existed? Diane slid a manila folder across the desk, the movement deliberate and damning. Inside was a dated memo from his onboarding process. You were advised to commission a complete capitalization table review during your transition. You declined. Your exact words were, she glanced at the document, I'm focused on forward momentum, not archaeological digs into ancient paperwork. He stared at the memo like it was written in a foreign language. I thought the founder shares were just symbolic. Historical artifacts. You assumed, Diane said, no sympathy in her voice, just professional precision. You never verified, so we operated within the existing structure. Standard protocol when leadership doesn't request otherwise. The pieces started connecting in Harrison's mind like a conspiracy board coming into focus. Harlow had never appeared on the main investor deck. Her name wasn't attached to any Series B or C option pools, never showed up in the executive compensation summaries, because she didn't want it to be visible. She'd been waiting, accumulating, preparing. And now, after being dismissed like yesterday's cafeteria menu, she hadn't called a lawyer. She hadn't begged for reconsideration. She'd pulled the emergency brake on the entire corporate vehicle. A new email arrived, sender, Harlow Kennedy. Subject, final agenda items. Harrison clicked it like he was defusing a bomb. There were only 6 bullet points, all clinical and terrifying. Governance structure audit. Bylaws review and enforcement. Executive authority verification. Leadership restructure proposal. Board seat reallocation. And the last line, simple and devastating. Voting begins Friday 10 a.m. No proxies accepted. Proxies not accepted meant they couldn't hide behind investor representatives or legal shields. They had to show up and face it directly. Harrison shoved away from the desk and stormed toward the executive lounge, slamming the door hard enough that the Warhol print rattled against the wall. A few junior staffers jumped. The social media coordinator made a mental note to delete the leadership authenticity video segment they'd filmed that morning. Everyone felt it, the shift in air pressure, the scent of panic mixed with expensive fabric softener and artisanal beard oil. He paced, then frantically called the head of investor relations, demanding an emergency call. But even as the phone rang, he knew. The investors didn't care who wore the suit. They cared who controlled the votes, who actually held the power to move the company forward or burn it to the ground. Anne Harlow, patient Harlow who'd eaten lunch at the same table every day and never raised her voice in meetings, she hadn't shown up for revenge. She'd shown up to reset the entire system. Somewhere down the hall, the executive printer whirred to life, spitting out copies of the new agenda. No dramatic music, no countdown clock, just the quiet mechanical preparation for a board meeting that was no longer ceremonial. It was now a reckoning. At 9:58 a.m. the boardroom was already full, though nobody was speaking. The silence wasn't respectful, it was suffocating, heavy as wet concrete. Executives clutched their coffee cups like they might offer protection. Harrison sat at the head of the long table, jaw clenched, fingers drumming an anxious rhythm against the polished surface. He'd worn a navy suit today, darker than his usual style, less inspiring keynote speaker, and more damage control press conference. The investors, patched in via video from New York and San Francisco, weren't smiling. Their faces were neutral masks of professional calculation. Diane sat near the door with her laptop open, expression unreadable. Then the door opened and Harlow walked in. No entourage, no theatrics, just the same practical blazer and the steady, unhurried walk of someone who knew exactly where they stood. She didn't sit immediately. He didn't need to. She placed a navy folder at the opposite end of the table, the end that now belonged to her, and opened it with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. The only sound was the HVAC system humming overhead and the distant ping of someone's phone notification. "Let's begin," Harlow said. No tremor, no dramatic pause, just the voice of someone who'd waited long enough and was done waiting. "I'll keep this efficient," she continued, sliding a document forward across the table's glossy surface. "This is a comprehensive list of executive decisions made without proper shareholder oversight over the past 24 months. New hires above director level, capital expenditures over $500,000, vendor contract modifications, rebranding initiatives, culture platform investments and facility expansions." She passed copies down both sides of the table, the paper sliding from hand to hand like evidence in a courtroom. "You'll notice the approved budgets in column C, and the actual expenditures in column F. The variance should concern all of us." She folded her hands and looked directly at the CFO, a man named Peter Donovan who suddenly looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. "Did you personally vet this expenditure?" She tapped a highlighted line showing a $2.3 million allocation to something called Cultural Resonance Consulting. Peter's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That was greenlit by the Executive Strategy Committee. And this hire?" She slid another page toward the Chief People Officer Angela Moss. "Director of Workplace Alchemy, salary band exceeding most of our senior engineers." Angela's eyes darted to Harrison then back. "I was told it aligned with our evolved organizational philosophy. It came from leadership priorities." "This organizational philosophy," Harlow said, turning her attention to Harrison whose face had gone from confident tan to concerning red. "Was it approved through the board? Was there any formal vote? Any documented oversight?" Harrison cleared his throat, trying to summon the confident charisma that usually carried him through difficult moments. "It was part of our Agile Transformation Framework, approved by the Leadership Advisory Council in accordance with our growth mandate." Harlow didn't smile, didn't react, just let the words hang in the air long enough for everyone to hear how empty they sounded. The Advisory Council with no board representation, no financial oversight requirement and no audit trail. Harrison started to respond but nothing came out except a sound somewhere between a word and a cough. Harlow straightened the papers in front of her with careful precision. "This company was built on accountability. Real accountability, not the kind you write on a motivational poster. It was built by people who showed up when the server crashed at 3 a.m., who renegotiated vendor contracts by hand when supply chains collapsed, who took salary cuts so we could keep our junior developers employed." He paused, letting that sink in. "That's why I didn't raise my voice before now. Because this was never about noise. This was about watching to see if the foundation could hold." He turned to Diane. "I'm invoking a vote of no confidence in the current executive structure, effective immediately." Nobody shouted. Nobody slammed the table. Just a slow, inevitable movement as hands began to raise. First the CFO, then the head of product, then operations. Even the two investors on the video feed, those neutral professional masks cracking just slightly as they clicked their virtual voting buttons. One by one, support materialized not with enthusiasm, but with the grim certainty of people who'd watched the ship taking on water and knew it was time to change course. "Motion carries," Diane confirmed, her voice steady as a metronome. "Majority reached. Restructure authorized per Founding Charter Section 23C. Harlow closed her folder with a soft sound that somehow felt final. Harrison leaned forward, desperation fraying the edges of his carefully cultivated image. "You can't just replace an entire executive team in one meeting," he said, the words coming fast now, unpolished. "This isn't how modern organizations handle transitions. You're making a catastrophic reputational error that will echo through the entire industry." I built the infrastructure that runs this company, Harlow said quietly, and somehow her quiet voice cut through the room more effectively than any shout ever could. You built debt PR campaigns and a leadership team that couldn't tell you the difference between our two largest server clusters. Silence again, but this time it felt different. Heavier. More permanent. Harrison blinked, genuinely shocked, like he'd never been interrupted before, like his voice had always been the final word. But it wasn't anymore. Not in this room. Not with every vote already counted and every page already signed. Harlow didn't make any dramatic gestures, didn't stand or point or raise her voice. She just reached into her folder and withdrew a thicker envelope, the kind attorneys use for serving papers. She passed it to Diane, who stood and distributed the contents with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this before. 12 envelopes, cream-colored heavy stock with the cascade letterhead, each one bearing a name in precise black ink. Termination notices for every member of the executive leadership team, effective immediately. Reviewed, notarized, legally airtight. Including Harrison's. Some eyes widened. Others dropped to stare at the table's polished surface. One executive, the VP of Innovation, exhaled slowly through his nose like he'd seen this coming from miles away but had hoped against hope it wouldn't arrive. Authority for these actions has been legally verified, Diane said, her tone completely neutral. Corporate compliance requirements have been met. Severance will be administered according to Section 12.4 of your employment agreements, which includes the executive transition clause you all signed. Harrison stood now, halfway between sitting and lunging, his chair scraping backward with a harsh sound. You don't have the right to do this. This is my company. I built this culture. I brought this organization into the modern era. It was your performance review deck, Harlow said, meeting his eyes without blinking. This is still my company. It always was. Before Harrison could formulate a response, the boardroom door opened smoothly. 2 security personnel entered. Not aggressive or rushed, just professional and prepared, like they were executing a scheduled service call they'd been briefed on hours ago. They looked to Harlow, who gave the slightest nod, barely a movement at all. Harrison's mouth moved but no sound emerged. He looked around the room desperately, searching for support, for an ally, for anyone who would meet his eyes. But nobody did. Not one person. The same executive team that had applauded when he'd announced Harlow's departure were now studying their folders, their hands, the table grain, anywhere but his face. I'll contest this, Harrison finally managed, his voice smaller now, almost hollow. You'll hear from my attorneys. This won't stand. You should contest it, Harlow said calmly. It'll give the new leadership time to undo the structural damage and rebuild what actually matters. One of the security personnel held the door open. A gesture that was polite but unmistakably final. Harrison didn't move for a long moment. It looked like he might launch into one of his famous speeches about vision and transformation and leading with heart. But nothing came. Not a single word. He walked out the same way Harlow had just days before, but nobody reached out, nobody offered condolences, nobody spoke. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam ever could. Harlow turned back to the room, her expression unchanged. Effective immediately, I'm appointing interim leadership. She placed a thin binder on the table, opening it to a marked page. Gordon Reeves will serve as Chief Operating Officer during the transition. He's been managing our primary warehouse operations for 12 years and understands our logistics infrastructure better than anyone in this building. He kept this company functional while others were off-site at leadership retreats. A murmur rippled through the room, quiet and surprised. Gordon, warehouse Gordon. Harlow's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made her position clear. It's time we rebuilt from the ground up with people who know what the ground actually looks like. She didn't wait for applause. There wouldn't be any. Just stunned silence and the slow realization that the entire power structure had just inverted in under an hour. One chair sat empty at the head of the table, still slightly askew from where Harrison had shoved it back. Nobody moved to claim it. The office didn't look different at first glance. Same glass walls, same carefully selected plants, same color scheme of slate gray and forest green that some consultant had probably charged $80,000 to develop. But something fundamental had shifted, like the building's foundation had been quietly reinforced overnight. You could feel it in the hallways, in the way people stopped performing for invisible audiences, in the way Slack channels got quieter and actual work got louder. Harlow never moved into the executive suite, never claimed a corner office with a view, never even put her name on a door. She worked from a small room on the third floor near the server room, one of the original offices from before the renovations, with a desk, a laptop, a whiteboard, and a steady stream of department leads who came by one at a time to explain what was broken and what they needed to fix it. She didn't micromanage, didn't issue sweeping mandates, just asked variations of the same 3 questions over and over. What do you need to do this properly? What did the previous leadership ignore? What am I not seeing? That was it. The Cultural Resonance Consulting contract was quietly terminated, the cancellation notice sent without fanfare or explanation. The Director of Workplace Alchemy position was eliminated entirely, replaced by promoting a systems analyst named Tessa who'd saved the company nearly $400,000 last year by identifying redundant software licenses nobody was using. Tessa didn't own a single piece of branded company merchandise and nobody cared. Gordon Reeves, now COO, ran operations with the efficiency of someone who'd actually done the work he was now overseeing. Weekly operational reviews, floor visits every Tuesday and Thursday, an open-door policy that was actually open, not just corporate speak. People started talking differently. Did you notice? It just works now. He doesn't make promises he can't keep. She never raises her voice, never needs to. There were no grand announcements, no rebranding campaigns, no all-hands meetings with inspiring video packages. Just a steady, unmistakable return to competence. Vendor payments stabilized and became predictable. Employee retention stopped hemorrhaging and actually improved. 3 major clients who'd been quietly shopping for alternatives renewed their contracts without negotiation. One of them wrote in the renewal agreement, "Good to see the adults are back in charge." The tech media caught wind eventually. A industry blog ran a modest headline, "Cascade Systems returns to founder leadership after strategic realignment." No sensationalism, no hot takes, just 4 paragraphs of straightforward reporting. The photo they used wasn't of Harlow. It was the original office space, the cramped co-working desk where 3 people had built something from nothing. That evening Harlow received an email. No subject line, just one sentence, "Glad you kept the soul intact. L. Leonard," the co-founder, the only other person who remembered how the foundation had been poured and why it mattered. Harlow didn't reply immediately, just sat at her desk for a moment, staring at the screen. Then she opened the company charter and added one more clause to the governance guidelines, typing carefully. From this point forward, any sitting CEO must conduct in-person operational reviews with frontline staff monthly. No delegation permitted. No exceptions. Documentation required. She didn't announce it at a meeting. Didn't send a company-wide email. Just filed it with the corporate records and moved on. Not revenge. Not a victory lap. Just restoration, one clause at a time. The new boardroom was different now, redesigned but not ostentatious. All clean lines and warm wood with a table that fit 12 people comfortably without making them feel like they were in an aircraft hangar. But the feeling in the room had changed more than the furniture. Calmer. More grounded. Gordon stood near the head of the table, not presiding exactly, just present as he walked the board through quarterly results that didn't need spinning or softening. Revenue stable and growing organically, retention at a 5-year high, client complaints down to nearly 0, infrastructure investments actually producing measurable returns. Numbers grounded in reality, not aspirational fantasy. Harlow sat at the side, not in charge, not even introduced, just there. Gordon glanced her way once near the end of the presentation, and she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. When the financial review concluded and the board members offered their approvals and careful questions, Harlow stood, not to take control but just to speak briefly. "This isn't about me," she said, looking around the table at faces that were finally paying attention. "It never was, and it shouldn't be." Her voice was soft, but it carried weight, the kind that made people lean forward instinctively. "It's about not forgetting who keeps the lights on. Not the marketing campaigns, not the thought leadership articles, the people who know which server to restart at 2 a.m. when everything crashes." She turned to the wall, reached into her bag and pulled out a small frame, walked over to the space beside the IPO certificate and the Series B announcement and hung it carefully. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded, the corners worn. 5 people standing in front of a half-built office space. wearing jeans and company t-shirts that had been printed at a local shop, smiling not for cameras but because they'd just signed their first real client. The original team back when Cascade meant late nights and shared pizza and the kind of belief that couldn't be manufactured by consultants. Nobody spoke. Harlow looked around the room one more time, no pride, no bitterness, just completion. Then she turned toward the door, paused with her hand on the handle and said quietly, almost to herself, "Underestimate the quiet ones if you want. Just remember to check who actually owns the ground you're standing on." She didn't wait for applause or acknowledgement. She didn't need either. The door closed softly behind her. Gordon straightened slightly, the board refocused, the meeting continued. The company would move forward now, but with memory, with roots, with the understanding that foundations matter more than facades. Out in the hallway, Harlow kept walking, past the employee recognition wall, past the mission statement etched in glass, past the reception desk where they'd tried to erase her just days before. Final thought, quiet as the air that followed her. They tried to erase a position. I erased a regime. 3 months later, the change wasn't visible in any dramatic way. There were no magazine profiles about Cascade's turnaround, no inspirational LinkedIn posts about authentic leadership, no requests for Harrison to appear on podcasts to discuss lessons learned from failure. The company just worked the way a well-maintained machine works, with less noise and more output. The warehouse that Harlow had visited on that pivotal day was running at 98% efficiency, the highest it had been in 4 years. Curtis still operated the same forklift, but now he had a direct line to Gordon's office and actually used it when he spotted problems. "Mr. Reeves listens," he told me one afternoon while I was there picking up some equipment. "Doesn't just nod and walk away. Actually fixes things." Evelyn in quality control had been promoted to director of standards, a position that didn't exist under Harrison's regime because standards weren't considered innovative enough. She implemented a feedback system where assembly line workers could flag issues directly without going through 6 layers of management approval. In the first month alone, they'd caught and corrected 3 potential defects that would have cost hundreds of thousands in recalls. The office culture shifted in subtle ways that somehow felt monumental. People left at reasonable hours now. The midnight Slack messages dried up. The pressure to perform constant enthusiasm disappeared like morning fog burning off. Someone removed the sign in the kitchen that said, "Dream Team Fuel Station," and replaced it with just "Kitchen." Nobody complained. I watched it all from my corner of the design floor, the same desk I'd occupied when this whole thing started. The new product manager, a woman named Claire who'd been promoted from within, stopped by my desk one afternoon with actual technical questions, not buzzword requests. "Can we realistically deliver this feature by Q3, or should I adjust the timeline?" she asked. No pressure, no implied disappointment, just a genuine question looking for an honest answer. "Q4 would be safer," I told her. "Q3 is possible but would require cutting corners." She nodded, made a note, adjusted her timeline. Under Harrison, that conversation would have ended with, "Let's pressure test our capacity assumptions," which translated to "do it anyway and work weekends." Claire just said, "Thanks for the honesty," and moved on. That's when I knew it was real. The tech press eventually noticed something was happening. Not because Cascade was making noise but because their clients were. A CTO from one of our biggest customers mentioned us in an interview about reliable vendors. "They're boring now in the best possible way," he said. "They just deliver what they promise on time at quality." Revolutionary concept, apparently. The article made its way through the office, and instead of leadership organizing a celebration or sending out a congratulatory email blast, nothing happened. Gordon printed it out and pinned it to the bulletin board in the warehouse break room with a simple note: "Keep doing what you're doing." That was it. Harlow still came in every day, still parked in the same spot, still wore practical clothes that prioritized function over fashion. But now when she walked through the building, people didn't avert their eyes or pretend to be busy. They nodded, said hello, occasionally stopped her to ask a question or share an update. She never rushed them, never checked her phone while they talked, just listened with the same focused attention she'd always had. One morning, I saw her in the original office space, the one they'd converted into storage during the optimization initiative of 2022. She was standing there alone, looking at the wall where they used to keep the project board, back when the whole company could track their work on a single whiteboard. Someone had found it in storage and put it back up. Current projects were listed in neat columns, color-coded by priority, no artistic flourishes or motivational quotes, just clear information. She stood there for a long moment, hands in her pockets, and I swear I saw the tiniest smile cross her face before she turned and walked back toward the stairs. Later that week, the board meeting minutes were published internally, something that hadn't happened in years. Transparent, detailed, no corporate speak obscuring the actual decisions. Someone in finance told me they almost cried when they read them. I can actually understand what's happening with the company I work for, they said. It's been so long. The real validation came 4 months after the restructure. Our largest competitor, a company that had been aggressively poaching our talent and undercutting our bids, suddenly stopped. Industry rumor suggested their CEO had been asked to step down after burning through a massive funding round with nothing to show for it. Sound familiar? 3 of the engineers they'd recruited came back to Cascade, not because we offered more money, but because, as one of them put it, I actually missed working somewhere that made sense. Gordon interviewed each of them personally, not to grill them about their departure, but to understand what had driven them away in the first place. Then he fixed those things. Salary bands were adjusted to be competitive. The review process was overhauled to be transparent and merit-based. The culture initiatives, budget was redirected to professional development and actual benefits that people wanted, like reasonable health insurance and parental leave that didn't require an act of God to access. I ran into Harlow in the parking lot one evening, both of us leaving later than usual. She was carrying a worn leather bag, the same one she'd had for years, and I finally worked up the courage to say something. "Miss Kennedy," I started, then paused, not sure how to continue. She stopped, turned, waited patiently. "I just wanted to say what you did, it matters. Not just for the company but for all of us who work here." She looked at me for a moment, really looked the way she always had when someone spoke to her, like their words actually mattered. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said quietly. "I just refused to let them forget what we built and why we built it. The rest was just paperwork." She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that holds a lot of history. "Besides, I had help. Leonard, Gordon, people like you who kept showing up and doing good work even when nobody seemed to notice. That's what actually saved this place." She unlocked her car, that same gray Honda that had probably hit 200,000 miles by now, and paused before getting in. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "Harrison will probably land somewhere else at some other company, and tell the story of Cascade as one of his learning experiences. He'll turn it into a TED Talk about resilience and pivoting. And some board somewhere will hire him because people like that always land on their feet. Doesn't that bother you?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore. Because wherever he goes, he'll still be him. And eventually he'll run into someone like me, someone he underestimated, someone who was paying attention while he was performing. That's the thing about building on sand. It works fine until the tide comes in." She got in her car, started the engine and drove away. No dramatic exit, no metaphorical sunset, just another evening commute. I stood there in the parking lot for a moment, watching the taillights disappear around the corner, and felt something I hadn't felt about work in years. Hope. Not the manufactured, mandatory optimism that gets pushed in corporate messaging, but real hope. The kind that comes from seeing something broken get fixed by someone who actually knows how. 6 months after the restructure, Cascade hit a milestone that would have been impossible under the previous leadership. We delivered a major product update on time, under budget, with 0 critical bugs. The engineering team celebrated quietly, no mandatory fun, just ordering pizza and actually leaving at a reasonable hour to enjoy their weekend. Gordon sent out a brief email. "Excellent work, team. This is what Cascade does." That was it. No hyperbole, no false equivalencies to moon landings or historical achievements, just honest recognition of good work. The following Monday, a small package arrived at Harlow's desk. Inside was a framed photo, professionally printed, showing the warehouse team on delivery day, all smiles and satisfied exhaustion, standing in front of loaded trucks ready to ship. No note, just the photo. She hung it in her office, right next to the old founding team photo, creating a visual timeline of what the company was built on. People who showed up and did the work. The investors who'd remained silent during the board meeting eventually spoke up, but not in the way Harrison probably hoped they would from whatever new position he'd landed. In the quarterly investor call, one of them said something that got quoted in industry publications. "We invested in Cascade because of its foundation. We temporarily lost sight of that. We're grateful to have leadership that never did. No apology to Harlow, no acknowledgement of their complicity in nearly destroying what she'd built, but at least they weren't fighting the new direction. That was enough. Harlow didn't need validation from people who'd proven they couldn't recognize value when it was standing right in front of them. The annual company meeting that year was different. No slick video production, no carefully choreographed speeches, no breaking into small groups to discuss vision alignment. Gordon stood at a podium in the warehouse because that's where the most people could fit comfortably, and talked for exactly 20 minutes about what the company had accomplished, what challenges lay ahead, and what support people needed to do their jobs well. Then he opened the floor for questions. Real questions, not pre-screened softballs. One person asked about the timeline for facility upgrades that had been promised 2 years ago and then quietly shelved. Gordon didn't deflect or promise to take that offline. He just said, "Budget's been allocated. Construction starts next month. Antoine in facilities has the project plan if you want details." Another person asked about the executive turnover and whether the company was stable now. Gordon looked at Harlow, who was standing off to the side, then back at the crowd. "We removed people who were taking us in the wrong direction. The company is stable because we got back to basics. Build good products, treat people fairly, don't spend money we don't have. That's not revolutionary, it's just sustainable." Someone started clapping. Then more people joined. Not thunderous applause, not a standing ovation, just honest appreciation. The kind you can't manufacture or mandate. Harlow stayed where she was, didn't wave, didn't take a bow, just gave a small nod and let the moment pass. After the meeting, as people filtered out, I overheard 2 newer employees talking. They'd been hired during Harrison's tenure and were still figuring out what the company actually was. "So wait, she just owned most of the company this whole time?" one said. "Why didn't anyone know?" The other one shrugged. "I asked Curtis about it. He said Miss Kennedy never cared about people knowing. He cared about the company working. Everything else was just noise." That night, I drove past the old co-working space where Cascade had started, the building where 5 people had turned an idea into something real. It was a coffee shop now, trendy and expensive, full of freelancers on laptops pitching their own dreams to potential investors. I wondered how many of them would still be around in 15 years. How many would build something that lasted beyond the initial excitement and funding rounds? Harlow had built something that lasted because she'd never confused performance with substance, because she'd valued the people who did the work over the people who talked about the work, because she'd played a longer game than anyone else realized. Harrison had walked in thinking he was the future. He'd never bothered to check who owned the past, present, and future. That was his mistake. Probably wouldn't be his last. But it wasn't Harlow's problem anymore. She'd done what she needed to do. Preserve what mattered, remove what didn't, and make sure the foundation was strong enough to last another 15 years. The company would face new challenges, make new mistakes, hire new people who might forget the lessons again. That was inevitable. But now there were safeguards in place, clauses in the charter, people in positions who remembered what almost went wrong. The quiet ones had won. Not with noise, not with drama, not with revenge, but with patience, preparation, and the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that just is, waiting in the foundation, written in the documents nobody bothers to read, held by the people everyone forgets to see. Until the moment they can't be ignored anymore. Until the moment when the person you walked past every day without noticing looks up and reminds you exactly whose company you're standing in. That's when you realize your mistake. Usually too late to fix it. Harrison probably figured that out somewhere around the time security escorted him out. Or maybe he still hasn't. Some people never do. They just move on to the next opportunity, the next stage, the next audience, never understanding that the quiet person in the back wasn't background noise. They were the whole damn show. They'd just been waiting for you to stop talking long enough to prove it. Harlow Kennedy owned 79.4% of Cascade Systems. She'd owned it for years. She just never needed anyone to know until it mattered. And when it mattered, she didn't make speeches or demands. She just presented the paperwork, called the vote, and restored the order. Then she went back to work because that's what she'd always done. The work was the point. The recognition was irrelevant. The ownership was just insurance in case someone ever forgot who built the building they were standing in. They forgot. He reminded them. And now the company she'd built could keep building, could keep growing, could keep being what it was supposed to be. A place where work got done by people who cared about doing it right. Not a stage for someone's personal brand. Not a resume line for an executive chasing the next opportunity. Just a company. Solid, real, lasting. Harlow Kennedy still drives that gray Honda. Still parks in the same spot. Still brings a turkey sandwich and an apple for lunch. Still wears practical clothes and asks good questions and listens to the answers. The only difference now is that people remember she's there. They remember why she matters. They remember that underestimating quiet competence is the fastest way to lose everything you thought you had. She taught them that lesson. Some lessons cost money. Some cost pride. This one cost an entire executive team their positions and their reputations. But the company survived. Thrived even. Because it was never about the executives. It was always about the foundation. And Harlow Kennedy was the foundation whether anyone acknowledged it or not. They know now. They'll remember. And somewhere out there at some other company making the same mistakes, another quiet person is watching, waiting, accumulating, preparing. Another Harrison is confidently striding through hallways, not bothering to read the bylaws, not bothering to check who really holds the power. The same story, different names, same ending. The quiet ones always win eventually. They just have to wait for the loud ones to get tired of performing. Then they present the paperwork, call the meeting, and restore the order. Every single time. History repeating because some people never bother to learn it. But that's their problem now. Harlow Kennedy taught her lesson. She's done. Back to work. That's all it ever was. That's all it needs to be. Bye-bye.